the war is over, into Market Street for the men and women of the city to celebrate. Up and down the street they parade, delirious with joy, for some of them have come to know the meaning of war. Grotesque and ugly in their influenza masks,
Huples cat. I'm an RN, I trained in England and I work in Canada. And I wanted to look at some of the old photographs that have been colorized and some of the old film that's been colorized from Spanish influenza that hit the world between 1918 and 1920. And I want to actually talk about how I think about what they were doing then and what I think's good and what I think's bad. I also want to talk about some of the important lessons that Spanish flu has for us right now in 2020. And I think you'll enjoy this, so grab a vegan snack and a coffee and enjoy. Cheers.
and those who have died have not died in vain. They've died to make the world safe for democracy. They've swept to victory in the war to end war. And so San Francisco celebrates in 1918 because the war is over and there'll never be another.
Of course, within 21 years there was the Second World War, and we've had continual wars ever since. World War I was absolutely devastating in casualty figures. What a lot of people still don't know is that Spanish influenza that started about 1918 and went to 1920 killed vastly more people, vastly more, than died in World War I. The San Franciscans proudly and happily celebrating the end of 4 years of war in Europe and 1 year or so for America were absolutely unaware, even though they knew there was flu coming, that many of the people in the parade would be dead within a year or two. In 1919, the Board of Health, local Board of Health, which then became the Ministry of Health later on, in the United Kingdom, actually did a 4-minute infomercial telling people what to do in the pandemic to keep themselves safe. And here it is, in colour, and I'll be stopping it and saying what I think is good and what I think is bad. It was a virus, but they didn't really know what viruses were back then. Totally true. Absolutely. What we say now is 14 days after the symptoms have gone away. Please stop shaking hands. And stay 6 feet or 1.8 meters away from people in the outdoors. This is 6 meters indoors, by the way. It's too early to say it, but we think New York City's spread was from the transit system. Do not cough without your mouth being covered. And wash your hands after coughing, please, or touching anything else. Pretty accurate, actually, for reasons other than what they thought. I'd avoid blaming the patient, but bacterial pneumonia actually was one of the major killers of the viral Spanish flu, and as far as we can tell, bacterial pneumonia is one of the major killers of our current viral flu. Not recommended these days. true, but bear in mind flu is very, very infectious prior to symptoms. Whilst this is true, when you breathe out or cough and the germs and the viruses go on surfaces, they can harbour there, most infectious for the first 10 minutes. However, you're actually inhaling when you're in the room with somebody. You're inhaling directly from the air. This is also true in 2020. If you do have severe symptoms, go to hospital after calling ahead of time. Get to a hospital before you collapse. Rest in peace, Mr. Brown. You were infected by somebody who didn't know what they were doing. In 2020, we know how to prevent infections, so this should not be a factor, should it? In 2020, nurses are also still making homemade masks. No effective gloves back then, but long sleeves are a bad idea. You put the germs directly on the sleeve, you then touch yourself and you can transfer it to your own nasal passage and mouth and eyes. Like 1919, in 2020 there is still a significant minority of people out there who are completely thick and don't want to wear a mask and don't want to self-isolate and don't want to wash their hands. It's crazy how we repeat the mistakes of the past. Well, thank you, Dr. Wise. I really do enjoy looking back at Spanish influenza from 1918 to 1920 and looking at the new colorized versions of it that's coming out. I'm going to put some photographs up and show you them as well. It makes it much more real to me looking at colorized images than it ever did looking at black and white. And it's absolutely staggering that in 2020 we're doing the same mistakes. We're doing the same gatherings when we shouldn't. We're still opening up too early, and people are still declining to wear masks and to shave their face so the mask can fit. It's staggering. It's an influenza. It's in the airway. You breathe, it comes out. You're in a confined space like a subway car or an elevator or an office. You're inhaling the droplets coming out of other people who may or may not be infected. And people are grabbing and seeing and finding research that proves that they don't need to shave and they don't need to wear a mask. It's a willful normalcy bias that's absolutely staggering and will infect a lot of people and will kill a relatively large number of those people compared to seasonal flu. And yet people are doing any sort of mental gymnastics they can to refuse to admit that we're in the middle of we're in the beginning of an influenza pandemic very similar to Spanish flu from 1918, and will have similar outcomes. We are no different from these people. They are us. They are our ancestors, literally. Our great-grandparents and our great-great-grandparents. They had a major advantage, and I'm going to do a video on that, because they had the major advantage of it happening just before the end of World War. So they had a lot of things in place that we in 2020 do not have in place to actually deal with the flu pandemic. Of course, the vast majority of people actually are wearing masks in public now, and the vast majority of people are washing their hands very frequently. The majority of people are doing sensible and sane precautions. But like I said, out and about in public, bare arms, no rings, no wristwatches, no hairbands. You have to be able to wash your hands for 20 seconds and clean it this way. It's absolutely vital that you take sensible precautions to prevent yourself from catching COVID-19 disease and from spreading it on to other people. It's vital. The reason it's vital is because if you don't, you will kill people like poor Mr. Brown in 1919. You may not know that you killed them directly, or you might. You might know after 3 weeks after you visited your grandmother or your uncle who's got diabetes in his 50s and that he dies of COVID-19 disease. You might know that you are probably the person that infected them. So know what to do in lockdown. So know what to do in lockdown to keep yourself in lockdown And don't rely on the government to have to tell you to do basic things like wear a mask in public without facial hair, and to wash your hands, and to avoid going in public as much as possible. It's pretty simple stuff, and it's absolutely staggering. The same cognitive dissonance that happened with the anti-mask leagues and everything else back in 1918, 1919 is happening again in 2020. Don't be thick. Wear a mask, shave, wash your hands, don't go out as much as you have to. Be very, very cautious about being around people who you don't live with. Know the signs and symptoms, know what to do if you have them, educate yourself. Education on a flu pandemic doesn't involve mindlessly proving to yourself that this is a bacterial weaponized plague, which I've heard people call it, when in fact it's a flu viral, a pneumonia, that actually comes from natural sources as far as anybody can tell and as far as anybody can prove. But the amount of energy and time and effort people are spending on disproving the known to prove that they personally are being inconvenienced and they personally need to go and have a haircut and they shouldn't be told by any government not to have a haircut or to wear a mask in public is absolutely ridiculous. One of the reasons we have government is because people like you are out there and you refuse to do basic common sense precautions to stop yourself infecting other people because you're that dumb and you're that selfish. This isn't about the Constitution of the United States, this is about the health of human beings on the planet. It really doesn't matter. You need to understand that the economics of this is not going to get better in the next little while, probably a year or more, and that you need to do whatever you can to protect yourself and your family and your loved ones from catching the disease and from passing it along. And as I said, there will be another video on this about when you actually should be opening up from lockdown in a pandemic. And I can tell you, as much as you're all angry at the government for telling you to lock down, they're going to let you open up very, very soon, and it's going to be far too dangerous for you to accept and understand and believe and obey government opening criteria. This is a flu pandemic. It is viral. It is natural. It's going to burn its way through the human population no matter what we do until we have a vaccine. We're not going to have a vaccine for months to possibly a year or more, and a vaccine for an RNA virus, which SARS-CoV-2, the virus is highly unlikely to be effective. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you've got any comments or any questions, ask below. Like I said, I am a registered nurse in Ontario. I did train in England, and this is my take on it. I think we need to understand history to avoid making the mistakes from history. Toodles. This has been a slow-moving Hungry Terrier production 2020.